Hello everyone and welcome back to the Youth Political Activism channel. Today we're making another video on the 2024 election cycle, the specific video being on Trump's VP picks for 2024. So Trump is undoubtedly going to be the Republican presidential nominee for this upcoming election. He's bounds ahead in the polling, as we'll look at later, but he still hasn't announced or probably even decided who his VP is going to be. So we're going to go over the potential contenders, the ramifications of picking those contenders, as well as context on the role of VP, as well as Trump's relationship with his VP in the 2016 and 2020 elections. So speaking of which, in summer of 2016, Trump announced that his VP running mate was going to be former governor of Indiana, or then at the time, governor of Indiana, Mike Pence. So Mike Pence was really unknown on the national stage. Not many people knew of him. Even those really into the political sphere weren't familiar with him. But what Trump gained from him wasn't really recognition, because he already had that. He was already the nominee, but he wanted to extend his support to this voting bloc that he didn't automatically reach himself, which was evangelical voters. So Mike Pence is knowingly very religious. He commonly says that his duty is number one to God, second the Constitution, third his wife. That's one of his main taglines. So that was kind of what his mentality and thinking behind picking Mike Pence was, or at least his team's thinking behind it, was that he's not going to reach out to these evangelical voters. And as we'll look at polling later, but just thinking about it critically, we can obviously assess that evangelical voters aren't going to really probably relate to or want to support a womanizer businessman from New York that has had 3 wives and allegedly affairs. And so Mike Pence kind of made up for that, because he's obviously really religious. He titles his book So Help Me God, and so he's going to reach out to this voting bloc, which is mostly prevalent in states like Indiana and Iowa. Indiana obviously being where Mike Pence is governor of as well. And these states were very important because in 2012 Obama won. The Democrat obviously won Iowa, and Indiana was kind of a close vote. And Ohio, again, a state with large amounts of evangelicals, also went to Obama. So these were 2 or 3 states that were really important for Trump to win, and states that he ultimately did win. So going over that, there's also some things to be said about Trump's current relationship with evangelical voters. So in the Iowa caucuses in 2016, he actually lost greatly among white evangelicals. Again, this was before he obviously announced Mike Pence as his VP, because he wasn't even a candidate back then, but he only got 21% of the vote, with Senator Ted Cruz actually winning among white evangelicals in 2016. But in 2024, the story is much different. He actually won 51% of them. And obviously he won among every voting bloc in the 2024 caucuses, because he's obviously the most prevalent candidate among all of them who were on the race at the time, most of whom dropped out at this point. But he obviously doesn't need help among white evangelicals anymore, and doesn't need a candidate to make up for that, since he already has that relationship built with that voting bloc. And again, Trump is going to be picking Mike Pence because their contentious relationship after January 6th, where, all that went down. That's an entirely video in and of itself. But to say the least, Trump is not going to pick Mike Pence to be his VP. So the question stands, what group is Trump lacking support in? What potential voting bloc does he not reach out to that he needs a VP, to reach out for him? So is that Christians? We obviously went over that already. No, it's not. He already has that support built in with white evangelicals. Is that among regular Republicans? And again, no, because he's almost 60% ahead in polling against every other candidate, so he doesn't need that as either. And then independents. This is kind of controversial because a lot of media says otherwise, that independents are a group that he's really poor among. But there are 2 things with this that I think are important to notice. First of all, most of these headlines were before the New Hampshire primaries, and since then we've obviously seen that he won New Hampshire, which has a large amount of independent voters, against Nikki Haley, who's a much more independent, appealing candidate. He won that, so that's not an issue. And then again, in the general election, he is ahead in the RCP average, and this is again from Real Clear Politics. So he's ahead among, he's winning the election at this point. He doesn't need any help from anybody. So now the question is, what criteria does Trump have to select a VP, and what are his best options at this point, because he doesn't seem to need any help in any of these areas. So what is he going to pick based off of? And to answer that question, we looked at the New York Times, which has a quite interesting page on potential candidates for Trump's running mates, and not going through all of them because they have quite an extensive list, and I don't think that many of these need to be even entertained, but going over the main ones. First of all, Tim Scott, a senator from South Carolina who ran against Donald Trump for the presidency, actually, but dropped out in November. He's a pretty viable option for Trump at this point. Obviously, he's going to appeal more to the black vote, which is a vote that's actually gone down with Democratic support in recent years, since 2020 at least. And it may be one that Biden needs to gain more support in and is kind of weak with. So that could definitely help boost support with Trump picking someone who is African American. He also has experience. He also is very fond of him. They seem to have a pretty good relationship because Tim Scott is currently on the campaign trail with Trump. And in a recent clip I saw, Tim Scott actually said, "I love this guy" or something. So he's obviously pandering to him. He seems to want the job. He's definitely qualified for the job. He's had a lot of experience in politics. He's never said anything too outwardly against him. There don't seem to be any major cons, at least. And then on to Nikki Haley. She's obviously solo in the race, which is surprising to many, but that's an entirely separate video in of itself. She was the UN ambassador under Trump for 2 years, from 2017 to 2019, and former governor of South Carolina. And fun fact, she actually endorsed and appointed Tim Scott to fill a vacancy as senator of South Carolina, so they have a relationship as well. She's currently in the race, so I don't know how much of an adversarial relationship they have at this point. We've seen Trump say bad things about people while they're running against him, but once they drop out of the race, he switches his narrative altogether and starts being totally pro them. So I don't know if that will necessarily hinder their potential relationship, but she seems to be a good pick. She relates to women. I don't think that's a voting bloc that Trump is necessarily lacking in, but she could possibly extend that. She is a minority of Indian descent, so again, another way that he can reach out to potential voters that he might not already seek with. Again, I think that the biggest hurdle with this will be that Nikki Haley has stayed in the race longer than anyone else, and she was, I think, the second candidate after Trump to announce her candidacy. So she's been in this race for the longest after Trump. She's said terrible things about him, and overall doesn't seem to be fond of him. She wants to take the spot over him, so I don't know if she would necessarily want to work with him, and similarly for Trump. So that, I think, might be their biggest hurdle. Elise Stefanik. So she's another type of candidate that I think would really respond well to being Trump's VP. So she's in the House of Representatives. She's actually been going up in the ranks, and she's gotten a lot more national attention since we've gone to the 119th Congress, I think it is. She's been in the House for a while. She's also younger. Again, I think that with all these, they seem to be getting increasingly younger, from Tim Scott to Nikki Haley to Elise Stefanik, but Elise Stefanik is the youngest, which is, I think, maybe the biggest criticism of Trump. I mean, other than his numerous legal cases and his 4 years as president, but one of the major things is also his age. Again, with Biden, his age, and Elise Stefanik is obviously much younger. She appeals to women as well, and she could possibly be a good VP pick as well. She doesn't seem to be too hoarding of attention. She obviously supports Trump in numerous ways, and so she's a good pick as well. I think that it really will boil down to Trump's relationship with these candidates. But again, one bad point of her is that she doesn't really necessarily relate to any voting bloc that Trump doesn't already fit, so that might be one of her downsides. Again, I'm just skipping over Marco Rubio and Mike Pompeo because I don't see them getting into this at all. I don't think that they'll even be considered amongst Trump's team as important candidates to look at. Loyalists, as the New York Times states, I think the only one really that's actually potential option is J.D. Vance. So J.D. Vance is, he had a best-selling book titled Hillbilly Elegy, which was also taken on by Netflix to make into a documentary. He's a venture capitalist, and now he's a senator from Ohio. He's obviously very fond of Trump, even though they both in the past kind of had a tiff earlier on, but then obviously he got Trump's endorsement, so their relationship is much better. Maybe he could apply more to the working class people, since he's from Ohio. He's from that working class background. He had a tough upbringing. So that possibly could be a potential group. I see more JD as a potential future president of the United States than a current VP. I think that that's his role right now, is to be a senator, follow out a few more terms, and then run for president himself. Ben Carson I'm not going to go over, because again, I don't think that he's going to be someone that the Trump team necessarily entertains. Sarah Huckabee Sanders as well. Next is Governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem. Again, I don't think that she should be a person that Trump's team necessarily entertains. She is a woman, but she's from South Dakota. That doesn't necessarily have a lot of appeal in politics. I think they have only 3 or 4 electoral votes, so not necessarily a large gain that he can make. And again, I see Kristi Noem as someone who can definitely rise in the ranks of politics and potentially be a future presidential or vice presidential nominee, but not at this point. I don't think she has the name recognition. She's quite young, and I think her future in politics is still a long ways to go, and I don't think that she needs to rush into these high-level positions just now. Again, I don't think, John Ratcliffe, definitely not. But Carrie Lake, again, I feel like she is just an identical Trump in heels. There's no difference between them ideologically. They're very, very, very similar. And so, again, there's nothing to gain from Kristi Noem, because Carrie Lake, because as I've been saying over and over again, you are trying to get someone who's an extension of you that can deliver your policy, but in a different packaging. Meaning either playing into identity politics or something, or a different voting block, like Mike Pence did with reaching out to evangelicals and Christians. So again, the same person is Carrie Lake as Donald Trump. She's not an extension of him. She's not going to appeal to a different voter base than him. So again, that's a note on Carrie Lake. Vivek Ramaswamy, I think that this is really polarizing pick is the best way to say it. He's obviously a billionaire from his entrepreneurship. He ran for president. I think he dropped out fairly recently after Iowa, I think it was. So he's a good pick. I think he could be a good pick, but just that his personality is a bit too big. If you've ever seen Vivek talk, he's obviously very intelligent. He's has a bright future ahead of him, whether that be in politics or otherwise. He's already had a very, very, very successful time. I think he's only 39 years old, or 40. So he's obviously already been successful. We don't know what he's going to do in the next 40 years. So he definitely has potential, but I don't think that he necessarily needs to be Trump's VP, maybe in his cabinet somewhere. But the world VP is very submissive one. You take the backstage role. You are not doing all the press conferences, you're not getting all the attention, you're not calling the shots, which I think is a role that Vivek is very much used to. He's been very successful up to this point in his life. He was a CEO. He likes those powerful leadership roles, and I don't think the role of VP would suit him necessarily. And he said that on a couple podcasts and conferences as well. So I think that that's an alignment. I think that he wants to help Trump, certainly. He's been campaigning with him, but I don't think that the role of VP would necessarily suit him. Like, the second in line, the person of lesser importance. But if you were to pick him, again, I think that there's something a little too polarizing about Vivek. He's, he's a bit of a more extreme version of Trump, so I don't know how far that would go in appealing to other people. I'm sorry, I think I was saying Vivek is Vivek, so just to clear myself. Again, none of these people I don't think really need to be talked about. Byron Donald, he again has a very promising career in politics. He's been doing very well in the House. He appeals to a lot of the really right-wing extremist conservatives, or extremists is kind of, but he's doing well for himself, and I think, again, in the future, not right now, he doesn't have the name recognition, he's not doing as well as he could, and so in the future, I think we'll see Byron Donalds on a presidential ticket, just not now. Is that it? Okay, no, we still have one more group left to go. Okay, so, Doug Burgum, no. Again, North Dakota, South Dakota, same thing. Very few electoral votes, very few people doesn't need to appeal to them. Tucker Carlson, not in the political sphere. I don't think either of them would want that. Again, the second in charge role doesn't seem to fit Tucker Carlson either, and Tucker Carlson is doing a lot of stuff right now with his show on X, and he just visited Putin in Russia, and so I think he wants to continue out his journalistic endeavors rather than do something or be in the office and not be able to do much. Rick Scott, Marjorie Taylor Greene, both no's. Very obvious no's. And Katie Britt, again, no. Katie Britt, I think she could make a wonderful vice president for someone later on. Not necessarily, she doesn't seem to have the leadership capabilities of being a president herself. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's too extremist again. You need someone a little more independent if you want to go where those articles earlier were pointing to. And then Rick Scott, no, again, doesn't have the promise, isn't an extension of Trump in any way. So, yeah. So, top picks for Trump, if we're going back through these, I think would be Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, if they can get over this hump that they're having now. Elise Stefanik, J.D. Vance, and Vivek Ramaswamy. Those would be the top picks that I see as being Trump's nominees. I think that if I had to make a bet on it right now, if I were a betting woman, I guess, I would say Tim Scott would be his best pick at the moment, and the person who would probably reciprocate that energy of VP the most and also want it the most. I don't think Nikki Haley wants to be a VP. I think she wants to be president. Elise Stefanik possibly, but I think that strategically Tim Scott is a better option. J.D. Vance, again, strategically Tim Scott is a better option. And lastly, Vivek Ramaswamy, I don't think he wants it as much. I think he really wants to be president. So Tim Scott is where I'm heading, but leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know who you think Trump is going to pick, and if there are any contenders that New York Times or I missed, let me know, and we might make a second update to this video. I mean, we certainly will later on when it gets closer to the summer when Trump will probably make his pick. So thank you for watching, and hope to see you next time.